This is ContraZoom, where we go back and forth about film. I'm your host, Dakota Arsenault. On today's episode, we are wrapping up the 41st Annual Vancouver International Film Festival. The festival ran from September 29th to October 9th in the city of Vancouver. This is now our second year covering the festival, and it was a treat. Joining me today to talk about what we saw is Matthew Simpson, one half of the Awesome Friday podcast, who was last heard only a few episodes ago on show 211, A24 Retrospective The Rover. If you are a fan of the Awesome Friday show, and if you listen to this pod, then that should be a given, you'll notice something a little different this week. We are both releasing the same show, so it might feel like you're hearing double, but don't worry, you don't need to put that drink down, you are right. So this is one festival, two podcast feeds, in one show. Welcome back, Matthew. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for asking. I really enjoy your show intros. I find them very concise and professional. I just wanted to say that.
Well, I appreciate that. It takes me a few minutes to write them up, and we try to follow a similar format every week, so that way our loyal listeners have that comfort like a loyal dog. I don't know where this analogy is going, actually.
I'm just gonna let that lie. I don't know what to do with that. So yeah.
Let that sleeping dog lie.
Yeah. Wow, we managed to continue mixing metaphors. Amazing.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's get down to business. We're going to talk about 5 films each from the Vancouver International Film Fest 2022, the 41st Vancouver International Film Fest. But before we go on that, Dakota, how many movies did you see this year at the film festival?
This year, I only saw 9, but I feel like that's pretty good. Working the hours that I do work, that doesn't really leave me a lot of time for movie watching. So the fact that I was able to catch 5 in theaters, I consider that a huge personal accomplishment on my end.
I mean, you're way ahead of me. I also only saw 9, and I only saw one of those in theaters. So I'm sufficiently jealous of your accomplishment there, to be perfectly frank. Yeah, is 9 like a lot? Like how many VIFFs have you covered? I guess would be a good place to start.
This is only my second, and I'm pretty sure last year I probably only watched about 5 total.
Oh, so that's almost 100% upgrade. So congratulations there.
Thank you.
This is my 7th VIFF. And it is tied with 2014 for fewest number of films watched, unfortunately.
Oh, wow.
I watched 9 in 2014 as well. So, yeah, that's fine, though. The one nice thing about, I don't know about you, the nice thing about working a little bit longer hours and having to be a lot more choosy about the things that I saw is that I don't really feel like I saw anything bad this year. And that has definitely not been true in past years.
You know what? I sort of agree with you there. Of the 9 I saw, there was only one I would say I was more than mixed on, just trending towards not liking. But the other 8 I definitely liked to loved.
Nice. Yeah, it's just nice because when you only have limited time, it's easy to just like listen to the buzz and listen to your friends and be like, okay, I'm going to go see this one because it's probably going to be good. Yeah. Whereas in previous years, like I think the year that I saw the most was probably, I can just tell you, it was 2019 and 2020. Both I saw 2019 and 2021. I saw 20 films each.
Wow.
And definitely in those years, I would just like go to a lot of movies, and then you end up seeing stuff that is not great. And the nice thing about that strategy is you also end up seeing stuff you just don't expect to be great that is great. But you also end up seeing stuff that you're like, wow, that was terrible. I regret missing those 2 hours of my life.
I hear from people that do festivals like that where, you're seeing 20 plus films. that a lot of the time you also just sort of forget what you see. You try to recall specifics about it, and you're just like, I honestly can't tell you what the plot was. I was, my third movie of 4 that day. I was running on less than 5 hours of sleep. I ate like one full meal that day. I just can't tell you much about that movie other than, yes, I did indeed see it.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing too. There was a year that I did, I can't remember what year it was, but there was a year that I did 2 days in a row where I saw 4 movies back to back to back to back, where I basically just sat in a theater and watched movies all day. And the next day, after those 2 days, the next day, I was super sick, and I basically vowed to never do that again because it's just too much. It's too much. I don't know. I'm super jealous of the people who can do like 4 and 5 movie days. I found out that year that is no longer me, and maybe never was. And because the same thing happened. I got super sick because I was just exhausted. Just like you'll see them. There's definitely movies from that year where I'm like, I definitely remember that I saw that movie. That is all I can tell you about that movie. Yeah.
I'm sort of curious. I haven't listened to it yet, but the latest episode of Classic Movies Live, Jeff Ballmer saw over 30 movies at TIFF. And so he was talking about his experience at TIFF. This is the first time he's really gone into a festival like that. So I'm very curious to catch up with that episode because I want to know what that's like, what it was from his perspective. I know Rachel was even in awe of him because she saw, I think, around 25 movies, and she thought that was overwhelming.
Yeah, and I think also, like, I haven't listened to that Classic Movies Live yet either. I'm woefully behind in my podcast listening, unfortunately. But there's another one of our friends, Todd, who writes for Real. He also went like gung ho at TIFF and saw like 30 some movies as well. And like, it's a young man's game. I don't have the stamina for it anymore. It's like I'm super jealous that they are able to do that, and I definitely cannot.
Yes, I agree. Once you get into our age, once you're in your 30s, it's not really something you could do anymore.
Yeah, your 30s. That's it. Your 30s. Great, awesome.
Did I just underestimate your age there?
Oh yeah, you did. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, not by much. I'm only 1 digit off, but it's interesting. I am now 41, which makes me either the youngest Gen Xer or the oldest millennial, and I can never get a straight answer as to which one of those things I am.
Oh, you are generationless.
Yeah, I'm in that middle zone where like I'm a little bit too young to be really, ultimately, I'm a little bit too young to be really like in Gen X. And I'm also a little bit too old to really, truly feel like a millennial. Because I feel like that was like a few years after me. But It's weird. It's a weird middle gray area. And it's, but the main point here is that I am old. I'm a middle-aged person now. It's a weird feeling. It's very freeing though. It's very freeing.
Well, you don't look it.
Oh, well, thank you. Clearly, I must have been wearing hats around you or something. But good. Well, that's a suitable amount of banter, I think, which is how I like to lead into the main part of our show. So we're going to talk about, I think, 5 films each. We have not spoken to each other about which 5 films we are going to speak about. So it's going to be a surprise. Our initial plan for this is that we're going to sort of break down our top 5 films of the festival each. Do you have a clearly delineated top 5, Dakota?
Yeah, I would say that my top 3 were absolutely solidified. It was really easy. And then I basically had 4 movies for the bottom 2 slots that I kind of had to decide between, and was a little tricky to come to terms with. And I think if we were to record this a day after or a day earlier, my list might have been a little bit differently, especially if I was able to capture a couple more movies during my time span. And, revealing behind the curtain a little bit, both of us were talking the day before we recorded this, being like, yes, we're going to wake up early and watch a movie, and neither of us did that.
Yeah, no, definitely neither of us did that. To be fair, we were both out late watching different movies, and there's in my case, there's the aforementioned middle-agedness of it all. So yeah, I definitely stayed out too late and woke up too late to watch another movie. Although I might yet.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I would love to watch maybe one or two of my screeners that I still have, but I don't know. But yeah, I unfortunately missed the party that happened last night with you and Taylor and Thomas and Todd. Am I missing anyone there?
No, that was it. Me, Thomas, and Todd, and Taylor, Beaumont's partner, all got together. We were supposed to have one or two more people, but for various reasons, weren't able to come, including you. But yeah, we watched a movie we went for dinner and watched a movie last night, and it was a great time. And I really appreciate all my movie and podcasting friends. They're all good people.
Yeah, we got a great group. I think it's really funny. I'm also gonna share a little anecdote about your usual co-host Simon. The movie that you went to go see was a movie called I Like Movies. Terrific name. And everyone was talking about our group chat about I like movies, I like movies, I like movies. And Simon chimes in and says, "I'm so out of the VIFF loop. I thought I Like Movies was just you guys saying that, not an actual movie."
That's true. Yeah. So Simon does not have we talked about briefly how we didn't have a lot of free time, and Simon has no free time. He's a really interesting perspective to have in the group. Really, I think really grounding actually to have in the group. We're all talking about all the movies we've had to see, and he's like, "Yeah, I have seen one this week," and I feel it really brings us back down to earth sometimes.
Yes, and it was probably one that you made him watch. And be like, "Here's a screener. You need to watch this. It's for the show."
Yeah, pretty much. That's actually I pretty much dictate a lot of his movie watching schedule. It's pretty. I don't want to say that I've gone mad with the smallest amount of power, but I've kind of gone mad with the smallest amount of power in that regard.
Which is why it's an interesting dynamic of you and I, just the two of us being on a show now, because we're both the power hungry people.
That's true. Yeah, we're both in control of our shows, and yeah. And I don't think we've talked about this, but this is a joint episode of both Awesome Friday and Contra Zoom. So if you're listening to this now that we've talked for 10 minutes, you should probably comment. Give us a comment on some social media to say where you listen to it, because it's going out on both the Awesome Friday feed and the Contra Zoom feed with different intros, but the meat of the show is going to be the same on both. It's an experiment, which I'm pretty excited about, actually. I don't know about you, but I think it's an interesting and fun idea.
It's one of those things where I wish I would put in the Twilight Zone intro of do not adjust your television set or whatever that, the outer limits, that's what it was. Do not adjust your podcast feeds. What you were hearing is normal.
I mean, you could still do that. I'm just saying that's a thing you could still do.
And honestly, I expect everyone to listen to both of these feeds, so that way we both get the numbers.
Yeah, I mean that's the dream, right? We want everyone to listen everywhere.
Yes. But let's talk some movies.
Okay, well, let's talk some movies. So you have a pretty clearly delineated top 5. I have 5 movies I want to talk about, and I think one that I would consider to be my favorite of the festival. So why don't we start with you and the first movie you would like to speak about? So your number 5, we'll say.
Yeah, sure. My number 5 film is Bones of Crows, which was directed by Marie Clements. It is a long-spanning biopic-esque movie that is basically a psychological drama about a woman's experience through the residential school system in Canada. She is a Cree woman. Her name is Eileen Spears, and she's played by Grace Dove, and she's also played by a younger version and a much older version as well. But we basically get this interweaving non-linear story about how the residential school system in what is now known as Canada, how it affected and traumatized and tortured in, physically, mentally, emotionally, sexually, a whole host of people whose lives were completely upended and ruined in the long-lasting effects that this system has had on the different First Nations throughout this land that we call Canada. So it is a very hard watch at times because the abuse and the torture is very frank, and it's very interesting because I said it's a non-linear storytelling. So we sometimes see the after effects before we see the cause. We see the effects before the cause, sort of thing. So that's a very interesting way of doing it, and I really appreciate it. There are some things that have issues with the movie. At times, the script is a little far on the nose with the way it wants to get its sort of gotcha moment. But more often than not, it is a stunning film, one that is really hard to watch with some fantastic filmmaking going on. Was this one that you were able to catch up with there, Matthew?
Unfortunately, it was not. It was one that I actually really wanted to see, but circumstances prevented me from doing so. I think that's going to be an interesting theme for me for this festival, in that I did actually miss a lot of the sort of big films. But the nice thing is that, like, this film is definitely coming out. Like, we're definitely going to get a chance to see this again, because it seems like a very important Canadian story, and by all accounts, like, everyone I know who's seen it has pretty well raved about it. And I'm very much looking forward to catching up with it when I get the chance. Because I think, as with Grace Dove's previous film, I know she's been in more stuff, but the last thing I saw her in was a film called Monkey Beach at VIFF a couple years ago. And like that film's available now. And it's also a very important and famous, like, Indigenous story. So I look forward to catching up with this one. I was really kind of crushed to not make it to this one, to be totally honest.
Yeah, I sort of got a little lucky with this one. I didn't properly read the terms and conditions of our media pass, and I showed up. This was the opening night film at the festival, and I tried to line up at the pass holder line, but there was no pass holder line for this movie. And luckily, Inez, who does media PR, saw me and gave me a ticket. So huge shout out to Inez for saving my butt and not making me waste parking that I paid for downtown for this. But this was the opening night film of VIFF. So it premiered, I think it premiered at TIFF, if I'm not mistaken. So this was its second run that it got, and I got to see the entire cast and crew go up on stage afterwards, and they did a little Q&A, and that was really special. But much like a movie like Monkey Beach, which I've seen as well, I expect Bones of Crows to be one of the big players at next year's Canadian Screen Awards. So if you follow the Canadian Screen Awards, this is probably going to be, there's probably about 4 or 5 movies that really dominate the nomination process, and I sort of suspect that this will be one of those.
Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty safe bet. It seems like, not only because, from what I understand, it's very well directed and acted, but it's also very, unfortunately, very relevant to recent Canadian history. And it's we're in a period where I think a lot of our most interesting filmmaking is coming out of Indigenous stories, and reconciling with our colonialist past, and this plays directly into that. So not only is it, from what I understand, a great movie, it's also just exactly the kind of thing that is going to win a lot of awards.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, for the longest time, French Canada was the area that was making the best films from this country, and I think that tide has now shifted to Indigenous filmmakers who are finally getting the time and the resources to make their stories as well. And there's been a fantastic crop of films that have been coming out of the First Nations up here. But yeah, what about you? I know you're a little on the fence of how to organize the movies you want to talk about, but what is the first one you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'm going to start with a film called Until Branches Bend, which actually won the award at the festival for Best BC Film. It was directed by a filmmaker called Sophie Jarvis, and it's set in the Okanagan, the interior of BC, and it's set in a town that is dependent on peach orchards, basically. And at the start of the film, the main character, who's played by Grace Glowicki, she works in a cannery, and she finds a bug in a peach. And she tries to raise the alarm, and she gets basically just a ton of pushback because she's found this bug, and she's like, we need to look into this. And everyone's like, it's fine. Like, we can't afford for this to be a real thing, so it's fine. And it kind of has a real, like, interesting 70s conspiratorial thriller vibe about it, where it's just this one person who has found a problem, and everyone's telling her that to, like, stop disrupting our livelihoods, stop saying these things. And, ultimately, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that she turns out to be correct. But the way the story plays out it's kind of like heartrending to watch, because I grew up in a small town, so like I sort of get the small community, and when someone raises a difficult situation in a small community, that can be kind of devastating to the community dynamic, and this definitely plays that out. And she's subject to ostracization and lots of gaslighting. And one person that she confides in throughout the film, like, outright throws, like, lies and throws her under the bus. And it's just a really well-conceived indie movie. And I really, actually, I went into it being like, okay, this is a BC film. It doesn't have a huge budget. Like, I wonder, is it going to be okay? And, like, sort of, sometimes I'm guilty of that thing where you float up an indie movie and you're like, this is going to be really indie, isn't it? But I was actually pleasantly surprised by how well conceived and well put together this film is. And the last 15 minutes are kind of stunning. And the film ultimately is sort of about the devastation about being correct about something that is just awful, like, and I don't know. It's also just the kind of movie that I kind of love film festivals for, because I don't know how you're going to see this movie after the festival. But I really hope that a lot of people do, because it's a really interesting film, and it's definitely the kind of film you want to watch, just so you can say that, like, when Sophie Jarvis is like a famous and well-respected director, I can be like, yeah, I saw her first feature, like, did you catch up with this one at all?
I was sent a screener of this, and I regret not looking into it because I knew I only had a limited amount of time. And so I'd asked for a couple screeners, and the PR person also sent me this without me asking for it. And now hearing you describe it, I very much regret not watching this, because this sort of sounds right up my alley, and hearing you sort of praise the praise that you're heaping on, especially, the ending. And I think a psychological drama thriller type movie like this, if it doesn't have that ending locked down, it kind of just ruins the whole movie. The fact that you're saying it succeeds at what it's trying to do. I love paranoia thrillers, so I might have to see if I can squeeze this in now.
Yeah, if you have the screener, I would definitely give it a shot. It's definitely a little bit lo-fi. Like, it's definitely, it's a very indie. It is a very indie film. It definitely has limited budget, but what it does with its budget is, and with the way it works with what it's got, I think is really stunning. And I really hope to see more from Sophie Jarvis, and in particular, in the cast. There's only one sort of like famous-ish person in it, an actor called Lachlan Monroe, who, if you Google him, you'll be like, oh yeah, that guy. But the main character, the main actor, Grace Glowicki, she's actually super good as well. And I would kind of like to seek out more of her work, because she is so effective in this film.
Nice. That's always awesome to hear, and I totally agree with you. Of when you're firing up an indie movie and you're like, oh, don't know what I'm gonna get out of this one. But it's always like the biggest surprise when you're just like, yes, I love when you're able to like succeed on like a super small budget, mostly no name cast, people that are doing work for the first time on this scale. It's always great when it all sort of comes together, because it is such a tricky thing to actually make a good movie.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I look forward to hearing your reaction when you do squeeze it in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What is your next film on the list?
So my number 4 movie is the movie that I ditched you and your group last night to go see, and that is Triangle of Sadness, which is the Ruben Östlund film, which won the Palme d'Or. It was the Östlund's second Palme d'Or after he won for The Square. And it is a satire of the super rich when they are all aboard a giant luxury yacht and things start to go wrong. And none of these rich people know how to take care of themselves. And some tables are turned, both literally and metaphorically speaking, is probably the best way to describe it. This movie sort of works best with A, not really describing a lot of it, and B, a lot of it, when it's humor based, you kind of just have to see it. You have to be in the moment. You have to be ready for it. I will say there is for anyone that has already seen it, because it has now made the festival round since Elise Khan, there is a long extended sequence that is not for the faint of heart. And if you've seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And being in a large crowd was very interesting, because it was just like every 30 seconds alternating between people dying laughing and people who I thought were going to match what was happening on screen. So yeah, this is a very excellent movie. It's very sad. It's very scary. There's a lot going on. It's very much, I sort of my critique of Bones of Crows, that it was a little on the nose at times. Triangle of Sadness is not subtle in the slightest. Basically everything you can see from a mile away, because it is shiny and glittery and encrust it with diamonds, because that's what type of movie this is. And Östlund is going for maximalism, and he definitely nails that, whether or not it works for you or not. But maximalism is what you get.
Yeah. So spoiler alert, this was actually going to be my next movie to talk about as well. So this is excellent timing. We actually on our show, we covered it as one of our two movies on our most recent podcast episode as well. I really enjoyed this movie. I don't want to like recap our entire podcast, but everything you're saying is correct. I'm actually super jealous because you got to see this in a crowd and I did not. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that entire second act in a crowd would be an experience for all of the reasons that you were talking about, because it is such a long but perfectly paced, like slow build of tension and revulsion. And I don't know if you've listened to our latest episode, but like at one point, I was watching this movie at home with my wife, and at one point she legitimately had to tap out, and she just left because of what was happening on screen. She already wasn't feeling very well, and she was like, I can't take this. I gotta go. But yeah, everything you're saying is correct. I felt a little bit let down by the ending of the film. Mm-hmm. I don't know how you felt about it, but that isn't actually, because like the ending is actually completely appropriate, and kind of the only ending that makes sense for the story he's trying to tell. But as I said on our podcast episode, there's a long stretch of this movie where, with most movies, I watch enough movies that I can sort of tell you what's going to happen next, at least in the broad strokes when I'm watching something. But with this movie, there's a long stretch where I had absolutely no idea what was coming next. And then there's a moment where I was like, oh, now I can foresee the rest of the film. And I felt kind of let down by that, which is very specifically a me problem. But I definitely think this is a very fun, and you're right, unsubtle film would be the one word description would be unsubtle for sure.
So I'll sort of follow that up with two things. One, I went to the theater and watched this with my wife, and much like your partner, she wanted to tap out. The difference being when you're in a crowded theater, you can't really tap out. So I had to watch her not enjoy most of this movie. So I felt very bad afterwards. So I can relate to that sentiment. This movie is definitely not going to be for everyone, I imagine. Is this going to be a Netflix movie? I can't remember.
I don't actually know the answer to that question off the top of my head.
Okay.
I don't know either. Think so. It's being distributed by Neon in the States and by Elevation Pictures here in Canada. So I don't know where it's. I think it's started. I know it's starting a theatrical run in the States this week, but I don't know where it's going to end up.
Yeah, I imagine when it eventually does come to streaming services down the line, whatever one it may be, I bet you can pinpoint the exact moment that people are going to start turning it off en masse. It's probably about 5 minutes past the point of no return of the middle sequence. I'll say that.
It's hard because you want to talk about it, but you don't want to spoil any of it. The whole second act is, even watching at home, the whole second act is an experience, we will say. It's, yeah.
Now, to sort of dance around your other comment there as far as predicting the end, I'll put it this way. You're referring to the absolute ending and the sort of reveal about it? Am I correct in that line of thinking where that's what you sort of predicted it would be something like that?
Yeah, there's a moment, and it's about 25-ish minutes before the end. There's a thing that happens, and I don't want to spoil any of it, but there's a thing that happens where up to this point in the film, I'm like, I have no idea what's about to happen. And that's a great feeling for me. And then something happens and I'm like, oh, okay, I know how this is going to end. Like, I just know.
Yeah.
Like there's like a moment where I can be like, okay, the rest of it's going to unfold thusly. Mm-hmm. And like I say, that's not a problem. That's a very, very specifically me problem to have with a movie. But I feel weirdly compelled to talk about it because that middle section and ultimately like the first half of the third act is so unpredictable that when it becomes predictable again, it's kind of a letdown. It's weird. It's a weird feeling. It's a weird complaint, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I sort of feel like we may not have noticed at the exact same moment, but there was a point where I also was looking at being like, there's really only one conceivable way this movie can end, especially as the power dynamics start to shift a little bit and you understand what's sort of coming up. And it's the sort of thing where I would love to have a more of a spoiler filled talk about this. Unfortunately, I don't think this is the venue because the movie has not come out wide yet, so it's not fair for people who haven't been able to see it at a festival yet. I purposely chose not to listen to your latest episode because I knew I was seeing it a few days after your episode came out. So now that I have seen Triangle of Sadness, I can now go back and listen to your review of Triangle of Sadness, where I'm sure it's much like this, where you are sort of dancing around some of the big spoilers, or at least the big moments that you want someone to go in fresh for.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was actually a difficult one to talk about for that reason. We try and keep our reviews as spoiler-free as possible, and there's a lot to talk about in this film that you would need to have spoilers to talk about it in any real depth.
Fair enough. Okay, so that was both of our fourth movies then, right?
Yeah, it was. So let's, I guess, skip ahead, and we'll talk about, I guess, my number 3. And I am going to go with a film that actually won. I can't remember which, but it won an award at TIFF, and it won the award for. I won the platform award at TIFF, and it won the award for Best Canadian Film here at VIFF, and that is Anthony Shim's Riceboy Sleeps, which is the story of a young Korean-Canadian man, teenager, who is growing up in the sort of late 90s, early zeros, in Canada with his mother. And I don't know. I don't really want to say too much more than that. It's a very interesting, very heartfelt, very moving film, all about growing up in the immigrant experience in Canada. It's wonderfully told. It's beautifully shot. It's shot in a lot of really like long, slow takes, which if you're a film nerd should be enough to make you want to watch it. But it's sort of wonderfully grounded, sort of wonderfully naturalistic, and just a really touching story about, you know, family and connection and the immigrant experience here in Canada. And it's definitely going to be available somewhere. It's winning all the accolades where it's been playing. So did you manage to see this one?
Disclosure time, this was the movie I was hoping to watch this morning, but if you have been listening to all of our episodes on ContraZoom, then you would know that on episode 209, Rachel had the opportunity to interview Anthony Shim, along with another film director for a different movie. But yeah, she talked to the director of Riceboy Sleeps and was absolutely swooning over this movie and really hoping that I would watch it so that way we can talk about it offline from the podcast. But yeah, this is one I'm really excited about, and from what I've seen, what I've heard, it just sounds absolutely stunning.
Yeah, and I don't want to. So it's interesting. I went into this movie. I heard that it won the platform award at TIFF, and lots of people sort of raving about it. And I actually went into it with a bit of trepidation because, and I don't want to like badmouth anyone exactly, but I saw Anthony Shim's previous directorial effort at VIFF a few years ago. I'm not going to name it, but like I didn't think it was very good. I didn't think it was particularly well written or directed, or acted. Like I just didn't really coalesce, and so I was kind of dubious about this one. But then when I watched it, like it's actually a really stunning film. It's like a totally different director. I mean that in the best way possible. I mean that like he very clearly has grown as an artist, and has crafted something really beautiful. There's a lot of comparisons being made to Minari, which I think is very high praise and also apt. Very apt. I mean, it's kind of an on-the-nose comparison, being like the Korean American and the Korean Canadian experience in parallel, but like it is, it's a really good movie. It's a shockingly good movie, and I really hope you get the chance to see it. You should just watch it after we're finished recording. It's really good.
I might very well do that. I'll have to decide between that and Until Branches Bend.
I mean, you can watch both of them. It is a holiday today. We're recording on a holiday. You have the time.
That is true.
Yeah, I would actually. I'm super jealous. I purposefully haven't listened to that episode of ContraZoom yet either, because I only just watched this, I think, yesterday or the day before. This weekend is kind of blurring together, to be totally honest. But now that I have seen it, I'm your episode where Rachel speaks with Anthony Shim is like queued up for me.
Fantastic. She'll be very happy to hear that, both that you liked and that you're listening to the interview. So I guess I'll move on to my number 3 movie, which you were trying to guess offline prior if it would make my list, because you said everyone is raving about it. And yeah, Broker is my number 3 movie, the latest from Hirokazu Koreeda. If you're familiar with this Japanese filmmaker, he's done stuff like Shoplifters, Afterlife, Like Father, Like Son. He is a very quiet and contemplative filmmaker, someone who is able to sort of capture all sides of life, the good, the bad, the pretty, the ugly, the easy, the complicated. He actually sort of reminds me a lot of Asghar Farhadi, where no situation is as clean and as simple as you want it to be, despite what life might make you believe, or other movies might make you believe when you encounter such a situation. And Broker is no different. Broker is the story about how there's a church that there is a baby box, which is basically where unwanted mothers will leave a baby in this baby box. And one night, a woman leaves a baby there, and the police are watching this baby box because they believe that some of the church employees are human traffickers. And so, that sounds nice and simple. Human trafficking, bad. Giving up babies for adoption should be a good thing because it's going to a loving home. How does this all sort of make it a complicated affair? But in reality, the truth is the people that are, quote unquote, doing the human trafficking are really good people. They really do care about finding the best home for people that often feel let down and failed by the adoption systems in Japan. But this is sort of a universal feeling. You talk to anyone that's sort of gone through this, the hoops that they have to jump through in order to prove that they are fit parents, whereas you look around and you see countless unfit parents that have their own natural children. So it's a very complicated process. And much like if you've seen Shoplifters, which was nominated for an Oscar a few years ago, the movie sort of devolves into family is the one that you make, not necessarily the one you were born with. And so here you have two adult men, a adult woman, a newborn baby, and another orphan young boy. So you have all of these people sort of coalescing together to become the family that they don't actually have in real life. So it is a stunning work that is heavy on emotion, but not overly saccharine. It is not super depressing. It really does revolve in this complicated middle area where nothing is as simple or as good as it seems in real life.
It just sounds wonderful, to be totally honest. I had the chance to see this yesterday, and I chose to go and hang out with my friends instead. Just because, I hadn't seen some of them in forever, and I decided that Broker is definitely going to be, as with say something like Parasite, it definitely seems like the one that's going to be available for me to watch later. And the other film I had to choose to see yesterday with some of the people, it seems like one that maybe won't be quite as available. So that's why I made that choice. But I'm super jealous. I really would love to have seen this movie in a theater with a group of people. It also has, I believe, Song Kang-ho in it, doesn't it? Who I'm a big fan of. He is
the lead, quote unquote, human trafficker.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of that guy. He's an excellent actor and just a wonderful performer, just in general. And I do feel a slight pang of regret that I didn't go see this movie. Because I technically had the chance.
It was super sold out. It was probably the most packed I saw the Center for Performing Arts during VIFF, and I saw 4 movies there. So you might not have even been able to get in because it was so packed. But yeah, for like you said, Song Kang-ho's in it. He is a fantastic actor. Most people probably have seen him in one of Bong Joon-ho's many films. He's basically his go-to guy. He was the lead in Parasite, the host, Memories of Murder. He has a small part in Snowpiercer. So if you are a fan of Korean cinema and Bong Joon-ho, you've definitely seen Song Kang-ho before. And then the other notable actor in it is Doona Bae, who for English language audiences would recognize her from Sense8, the Netflix show from the Wachowskis.
Yeah, or I think, she's in Cloud Atlas as well. She's wonderful in that.
She is, yes, and she's also in The Host. So two very recognizable international Korean stars.
Yeah, it just sounds wonderful. like I say, I'm super jealous you got to see that one, but it's definitely one that's going to be around, in the next couple of months, almost certainly. So I will get a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to be a fairly easy one to watch if you're a fan of international cinema. I imagine your local theaters that show those types of movies will be showing them wherever you might be listening if you are in a city. And I imagine it's also probably going to be fairly easy to find once it comes to whatever streaming or rental service you use.
Yeah, it also just sort of has the same energy about it that say Drive My Car did last year, or Parasite did the year it came out, where it'll be the big Asian award nominee at all the shows this year, is what it feels like.
It actually kind of occupies a weird spot. It is a Korean-Japanese co-production. Hirokazu Koreeda is Japanese, and the movie is all in Korean with Korean actors. But neither country decided to submit it for its pick for Best International Film at the Oscars. But what it has going for is the fact that Koreeda has previously been nominated by the Oscars in the international film category for Shoplifters. But you also have Song Kang-ho, who I think is going to get a bit of a push by Neon to be in the Best Actor race as well. So I would not be shocked in the slightest if it maybe shows up at the Oscars, just not in the category that we're expecting it to be in.
I mean, that would be a well-deserved nominee. I haven't even seen the movie, but Song Kang, the Oscars are just a giant popularity contest, and they give awards to people who should have gotten it in other years all the time. So if Song Kang-ho were nominated and won, I would be totally fine with that, no matter what year it was.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Well, let's move on to, I guess, my number. Sorry, I messed up the counting because we had the same number 4. So I guess I'm on my number 2, which is a very low-key but enthusiastic documentary called The Grizzlie Truth. And I think you watched this one as well, didn't you?
I did, yes. And I'm glad you are talking about it because it was one of the ones that just missed my list.
Yeah, so The Grizzlie Truth it's a documentary, is directed by a director called Kat James. She also directed a documentary a couple years ago about Big Country, Bryant Reeves, who was a basketball player here in Vancouver for the 6 years that we had the Vancouver Grizzlies. And this movie is all about just the Vancouver Grizzlies and the 6 years that they were here in Vancouver before they left for Memphis, and the gaping hole in the city's soul that was left when they unceremoniously left for Memphis. I don't know that this film is going to be for everyone, but if you're a basketball fan or if you existed in Vancouver in the 90s, then this is a film you should definitely seek out and see. It's a little bit lo-fi. It's definitely got some budgetary limitations, but it has such a strong heart, and Kat James is so clearly just in love with basketball and with the Grizzlies in particular. It was kind of a wonderful thing to watch. And if you, like me, if you grew up in the 90s, I went to a bunch of Grizzlies games. I think I posted some of my ticket stubs in our group chat. And it was wonderful to have an NBA team. And I'm not even a big basketball guy, but it was wonderful to have an NBA team. And when the Grizzlies left, which was maybe shock's the wrong word, but it was a bad scene when the Grizzlies left Vancouver, because they were a bad team. Let's just get that out of the way. They were a bad team. However, they were clearly starting to get better. And we as a city, as a province, were denied the chance to see them become a good team because they left before that happened. And it was kind of devastating. And this film kind of rehabilitates the image of the Memphis Grizzlies for me as a Grizzlies fan. I've always kind of again, I'm not really a basketball guy. I'm not really invested, but whenever I have watched or, engaged with basketball without having any context at all, if anyone's like, oh, Memphis Grizzlies, I'm like, yeah, fuck them, whatever. I'm not, no Memphis. Uh, and also of Steve Francis, who, many people see as the sort of catalyst for the Grizzlies leaving. He was very famously drafted by the Grizzlies and then refused to play here. And that was, by a lot of people, sort of see that as the beginning of the end of the team here. But this film, for me, kind of makes it okay to recognize Steve Francis as the talent that he is, and also to maybe recognize that the Memphis Grizzlies are still the Grizzlies, and maybe they're okay to root for. So it's a very Vancouver specific, very BC specific film, perhaps, but I really enjoyed watching it, and it really brought up a ton of nostalgia for me. And I hope that everyone in BC gets a chance to see it, basically. And you're very famously from the other side of the country. So how did you feel about this film?
Yeah, I wrote in my review of this movie, I kind of start my review off of, there's a couple things to know about me. One, I am from Toronto, so that makes me a Toronto Raptors fan. And two, I got into basketball around 2006, so I completely missed the Vancouver Grizzlies era. I knew of them, I like their jerseys, but I didn't really know that much about them. And basketball isn't my number one sport to begin with. Hockey is, so I know all the history about every team and all parts of the league. I love it. I eat that stuff up for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But basketball, I'm not. I like watching the Raptors play. It's fun. It was great when I got to see the Raptors win a championship and go to the parade and all that sort of stuff. That was great. But I don't have that connection with the Grizzlies. And now that I'm out here, living in Vancouver, I'm trying to sort of, I don't want to say ingratiate myself, but ingrain myself in the community. I'm never going to call myself a Canucks fan, but at the same time, if the Canucks are playing and my Toronto Maple Leafs are not, I'm going to watch it. And more often than not, we sort of hate similar teams. So I'm fine with rooting for the Canucks, say against the Boston Bruins. So going in with that sort of history of who I am as a person, watching the Grizzly Truth was an interesting experience because it really sort of felt like a fly on the wall for me, where I can watch it and be like, yes, I see. This must have been very painful, but not having the emotional connection, because this movie really sort of lives and dies on, did you care about the Grizzlies and how you feel about that? I feel like this movie is going to do like gangbusters out here in BC, and maybe the rest of Canada is probably going to look at it and be like, yes, but the Raptors sort of thing is the reaction. So it was a very interesting movie. I thought it was very well made. I thought Kat did a great job. It almost has a Michael Moore-esque feel to it, where she really inserts herself into the narrative. The movie is not just about why the Grizzlies left and how they left, but it's more about her journey of understanding who she was as a child, growing up being this Grizzlies fan, and sort of her investigative prowess coming into her own, of slowly coming to terms with everything. And so in that sense, I thought it was a very well done. It has a bit of a sort of a noir gumshoe detective like vibe to it, where she's literally, sitting in an office with a crazy bulletin board behind her, and she's watching old clips on a Windows 98 computer, basically. But yeah, it's a fun movie, and I can acknowledge that if you are from Vancouver and a basketball fan of a certain era, this movie's going to hit you differently than it did, say, for me.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. Like I said, I think it's a very Vancouver specific, or BC specific, maybe at least, sort of film. Because, I think I'm a little bit older than Kat James is, but I think a lot of us went through the same journey that she did. I didn't become the super fan that she did. I didn't technically live in Vancouver, so I didn't go to games all the time, but I loved going to games. And I just loved having a team. They were an easy team to root for, even though they sucked. And they really sucked. Don't get me wrong. They really sucked. But I I just like it. It kind of felt like, more so than any other documentary I've seen this year, it was one where like I was really on that journey with her. Like my emotional journey sort of paralleled hers through the narrative of the film, and I really appreciated it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that it worked so much for you. And I know our other friend Todd, I think, really went for it as well.
Yeah, Todd, I think, is a huge basketball fan, so I think it really worked for him. So yeah, if you're from BC or if you love basketball, then this movie's definitely going to work for you.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I guess I should talk about my number 2 movie then, right?
I mean, that is how we're doing things. So yeah, let's go ahead. Let's move on to your number 2.
So my number 2 movie, I have also another reason why I have not listened to your latest episode yet, but the other than Triangle of Sadness, the other movie you talked about is a French-Canadian film called Viking, and I really love this, and I know you're going to disappoint me because I've seen your Letterboxd review of this, and I think we very briefly chatted about it in our group chat, but I really went for this. I don't know why. It's a satire of, space movies. If you've seen The Right Stuff, if you've seen Apollo 11 or other films like that, you will recognize all the hallmarks that this movie has going for it. Even 2001: A Space Odyssey, there are several nods to that film in here. But basically, there is the first manned mission to Mars, and the spaceship is almost getting to Mars, and the sort of stand-in for NASA is realizing that there are interpersonal conflicts happening aboard that might doom the entire mission. So what they need to do is they need to basically bring together a group of people who have exact personality matches, so that way they can simulate the actual difficulties this Mars mission crew is going through and try to recreate them and come up with solutions. So they find 5 people who supposedly match the same personality traits as the 5 people on board, and every day they are basically given a punch card of what their motive and motivations are based on the crew reports. So when someone wakes up well rested, happy, excited, hungry, tired, annoyed at someone, fighting with someone, whatever it may be, that's the energy that they have to bring. And they have to live the 2.5 years that this Mars crew is doing as someone else. I absolutely loved it. I found it incredibly hilarious in a subtle way. And I found the satire of space films to be so perfectly up my alley that I just absolutely love this one. So yeah, I can't speak highly enough of this one. I think it's going to be a very tricky movie for people to find, as most French-Canadian movies do not get wide releases in English language Canada, and they often don't show up on streaming sites. So this will probably have a limited run where it's in theaters for a week, and then it will probably be gone forever. But this is one of my absolute highlights from this festival.
Yeah, I think if we're lucky, it'll end up on Crave. But Crave has like a French language sister service that I don't subscribe to, which is probably where it'll end up. I like this movie, actually. I don't think it's this. I didn't love it. And Simon hated it, but I liked it. I thought it was an interesting, not entirely original, but an interesting concept. And I thought a couple of the performances were pretty spectacular. It's definitely a film that I think asks a lot of the viewer in terms of how much you have to buy into the, let's be frank, completely absurd sort of setup of what they're doing. But, and I think my main criticism is that I don't think it, I struggle with, and I know it's a very like subtle difference, but I struggle with whether I think it was not absurd enough or just played too straight. That kept me from loving it. But I think I said in our spoiler alert from our podcast, but like I said that like for the people who are going to connect with this film, they're going to connect with it hard. And thank you for bearing that theory out.
Yeah. I really love this one, and I understand where you're coming from with the fine distinction of maybe how to interpret it. It worked for me. It's funny. I wrote my review, and it was a tricky review to write because this movie is very complicated to describe. What I described in the plot summary there was sort of the bare bones of it, and even that I feel was a little convoluted. And having to use quotes over the characters' names and then not use quotes for the real characters' names is a very complicated process to write a review. I publish it. I'm like, well, if anyone's reading this, I hope they understand what the hell I'm trying to talk about here, because if you haven't seen it, none of this makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, because like the main character, who is played by Steve LaPlante, whose name is David, and he's playing John in the film. So yeah, there's definitely like a minor bit of character inception there, as they're all people playing people.
Yes.
And I think that a couple of the performances are pretty great. And I do think that a couple of the actors sort of understood the assignment a little better than some of the others. But ultimately, like, I think that if you can buy in, there's definitely something there for audiences. And I did like it. I thought it was, what's the right word here? It's a little bit niche. It's a little bit weird, but again, I think if you're going to connect with it, in a meaningful way, then you'll connect with it really hard, like you did. But otherwise, I also just thought it was, generally good. I fall into more of like, yeah, this is totally fine. I would totally watch this again, sort of camp. I didn't connect with it the same way you did, but I thought it was good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is definitely the type of movie that I could see them remaking into an English language version, but I feel like a lot of the humor comes from the Quebecois sensibilities, so who knows if such a thing would turn out.
Yeah, I don't know how you would translate this. It is a very interestingly Quebecois film. And even just in terms of like the cadence in the way they speak, I think has a lot to do with how some of the stuff is funny. Like for example, there's a scene right at the beginning when they're being told what their mission is, and Christopher Heyerdahl is there as the sort of NASA stand-in guy, and he's talking about how they need to. They talk about the Viking probe and how they had a duplicate, and that's how they solved lots of mechanical problems on Mars, because they could simulate them here on Earth. And so in French, he repeats a couple of times this phrase, the simulation, comprehension, solution. And if you say that a bunch of times in French, it becomes funny very quickly. But if you say it in English, it's kind of bland. And I don't think it would translate. I think the way it exists is the way. I think that someone may try to remake it at some point. I don't think it'll be super successful.
It's like when they remade that film. I think it was called Starbuck, about the guy who was a sperm donor who ended up having 27 kids, and then they remade it with Vince Vaughn, and it did not work at all.
No, it doesn't work at all. Which is a shame, because Starbuck is actually a pretty great film.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same. There's another great French-Canadian film that got remade from the 90s. I don't know if you've seen them, but the original film, I believe, is called Louis XIX, and the American remake is called Ed TV, and it's Matthew McConaughey. And Ed TV is not like Ed TV is a really bland. It's like not bad exactly. It's just kind of like a bland 90s rom-com. But the original is actually very funny.
Interesting. I didn't know that was a remake. I don't know if I've seen Ed TV in full, but it was definitely one of those movies that would play on TV often enough that I've seen more than enough clips from it. Yeah,
there's just enough famous people in it, and it didn't do well enough in theaters to really be a mainstay, but it did well enough that it became like a mainstay on TV. But it's a remake of a French Canadian film called Louis XIX, and Louis XIX is actually really funny.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. That was my thoughts on Viking. And now that we've talked about it, I'm very excited to listen to you and Simon talk about it. Mr. Hot Takes himself.
That's true. I'm going to start calling him that, Mr. Hot Takes. We should just make that a thing. Yeah. Well, let's move on then. I have one movie left, and so do you. I guess we'll start with mine. Mine is a film that I went to see just yesterday, as of the time of this recording. It is the debut feature from film critic turned filmmaker Chandler Levac. It is the 90s set coming of age comedy drama I Like Movies. And you missed seeing this with us yesterday, and I kind of wish you were there because it's a lovely, lovely Canadian film. And I had a really good time watching it. The story is about a young man played by, I'm going to mispronounce his name, Isaiah Leighton, I believe is his name. The character is called Lawrence. He is about to graduate high school. He's dead set on going to NYU, and he is a very toxic film bro. And the whole film is his journey. I mean, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that he stops being a toxic film bro at the end. But the whole film sets him up and then very much holds him to account for basically being an asshole. And it's set in the year 2003. It's set in Burlington, Ontario. There's a lot of very distinctly Canadian touches. And it just is kind of it's funny, it's heartfelt, it's kind of heartbreaking at times. And I just had a great time watching it. And I think this is one too, where I think being in a crowd at a festival really helped. I do kind of worry that I kind of had that sort of festival goggles effect watching it, but I had a great time watching this movie. And I think part of that is that, like, full disclosure, like, I was an insufferable 19-year-old film bro at one point. So I kind of felt attacked by parts of it. But as with the main character in this, I'm glad I grew out of it. And you didn't get a chance to see this at all, right? Like, I don't think there were any screeners for it. It only had a few screenings. So you didn't get a chance to see it at all?
Yeah, I'm very disappointed I missed this. I know Rachel loved it, seeing it at TIFF, and so it was pretty high on my priority list. And the fact that it wasn't on the available screeners and seeing it in person just sort of didn't work out. And I'm very sad I missed it with you guys, because it sounded like a ton of fun to be in that crowd. And yeah, I really wish I saw it, because I have actually lived in Burlington for a period of my life. After college, my family had moved to Burlington, and so I'm familiar with the area. And I was born in the town right next to it, a town called Oakville. So that whole area just outside of Toronto in suburbia was my youth. And I feel like that would sort of extra resonate with me, because I spent my youth in video stores as well. So it's a real shame that I missed it, and going to be super high up on my priority list of trying to acquire this film in some form or another to watch it. I don't know. It sort of seems, based on the reception that it is getting, that we're talking about movies that might be big players for the CSAs next year. And this might be the English one that's the big player, outside of maybe something like Women Talking.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I think that this, I think something like Women Talking, which, full disclosure, I have not seen, is definitely one that's going to be make a big play for Best Picture at the CSAs. But this is the one that'll probably make a big play for maybe director or screenplay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's,
and maybe and maybe some performances could, like some supporting performances might get nominated as well. I actually really hope. There's an actor named Krista Bridges who plays the mother of the main character, and she's wonderful. She's so wonderful in this movie as a sort of exasperated mother of a child who, has some. I guess the polite way to say it would be has some emotional problems. And I can't imagine what it would be like to watch this movie if you grew up in or around Burlington. But having grown up in Canada in the 90s, living in video stores and our local theater, this checked a lot of nostalgia boxes for me. It checked a lot of my personal experience boxes, and I ended up really loving it. I think there's of all the films I've seen at the festival this year, which again, it's not that many, but this might be the one that actually makes my year-end list of films that I loved.
Oh, so fantastic! That's so nice to hear.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this offline before about how like I feel like I need to represent more Canadian cinema in my online presence, and I will champion this movie. I really hope lots of people see it.
Nice. Well, that makes me even more excited to see it now that we've talked about it. And I'm going to echo your sentiment there about wanting to champion Canadian films, so much so that we've talked about, I feel like 4 or 5 movies have already made our respective lists total combined. But yeah, my number 1 is also a Canadian film, and that is the Clement Virgo film Brother. We're talking about the fact that I grew up just outside of Burlington and lived there briefly as a young adult, as a recent college graduate. Brother takes place in Toronto. Now, obviously, it takes place in Scarborough, if you are familiar with the Toronto area, which is going to inform a lot about what this movie is in the setting behind it. I didn't live in Scarborough. I never have, so I can't really comment too much of the authenticity of that area. But from what I do know from visiting and driving through there and being adjacent to that section of the city, this all rings very true. But yeah, for anyone that doesn't know this movie, this is about 2 brothers who are sort of grappling with their identities, with what it means to be a man, with what it means to be the children of immigrants who are being raised by a single mother, what it means to be Black in the late 80s through the early 2000s in a city that is very multicultural, but still has, as anyone can attest to any city, its fair share of problems that people of color have to face that unfortunately is not a reality for white people like myself. And if anyone's familiar with Clement Virgo, he is probably Canada's a preeminent director in regards to telling stories about the Black experience. He has been making hit after hit since the early 90s. And this is just a stunning masterpiece. Every once in a while, you'll watch a movie. We talked about it earlier. The idea of watching a low budget indie movie, you don't really know what to expect. And Brother, I watched this movie and I don't think I've seen a more visually stunning, well-acted, well-paced, choreographed movie in any recent time. I'm going to compare it a bit thematically to a movie like Moonlight, which also features Brother is done more in a non-linear way, whereas Moonlight was done in 3 chapters. But Brother also sort of takes place in 3 portions of these 2 young men's lives. Specifically, the younger brother of the 2, Michael, who is played by Lamar Johnson in the teenage and adult years. But the older brother, Francis, who is played by Aaron Pierre. Every year, us as movie lovers, we're going to watch some films that we know, in the grand scheme of things, awards mean nothing. They're silly, they're stupid, they're self-congratulatory. I still enjoy them and I love them and I follow awards races and all that sort of stuff. But us as movie lovers, we'll watch movies and we know, hey, this movie is going to get completely ignored by year-end lists, by critics groups, by award shows, all this sort of stuff. And Brother is that movie this year for me. And Aaron Pierre is that actor who I am going to be banging the drum that he was absolutely robbed of an Oscar nomination and probably win in my books.
Wow. That's high praise. This movie was on my list, actually based on the strength of Rachel recommending it out of TIFF, and I did not get a chance to see it, and I was kind of upset. So hearing you rave about it makes me even more upset, but it also sounds like the kind of thing that like will be available, so I will be looking for it whenever it comes out. I also, based on Rachel recommending it, but also I really enjoyed the younger brother, who's played by, you said his name already, Lamar Johnson, right?
Johnson, yeah.
Yeah, he was in a TV show that I really liked called Your Honor with Bryan Cranston 2 years ago. and he was really good. And I've been wanting to see him show up in more stuff, and I'm really glad that he is. So yeah, I'm super. And you're right about Clement Virgo. Like I haven't seen a ton of stuff. Like I don't think his filmography is not that. He doesn't have a ton of breadth in terms of theatrical releases, but what he has put out has been amazing. And even just recently, he directed a couple episodes of that new Jeffrey Dahmer show on Netflix, which is a little controversial and maybe rightly so, but the episodes he directed are both great.
Yeah, he's someone who definitely does not have the clout associated with some other Canadian directors have received, respectively south of the border. But he has a stunning body of work. He doesn't have a ton of movies, but all of them are sort of considered in the pantheon of great Canadian works. His work in TV is also quite prolific. You know, he directed 2 classic episodes of The Wire, which says a lot about the sort of the circles that he runs in as far as his esteem. He was the driving factor behind the miniseries The Book of Negroes, which was a Canadian miniseries as well. You mentioned he did a couple episodes of the Dahmer TV show. He did work on Empire and stuff like that. So he gets work and is someone who I think is very well respected within the industries. He unfortunately just does not have the name recognition that goes along with someone that is so well known. He's basically the equivalent of when you say your favorite band's favorite band. He's the type of guy who would appear in your favorite director's favorite director list.
Yeah, that's an excellent way to put it, actually. But maybe hopefully with something like Brother, like this again feels like another one that's going to make a pretty strong Canadian Screen Awards play, and maybe that recognition will parlay into something bigger, or I mean maybe not. Like it's also, I kind of appreciate that he sort of seems to understand his lane and stay in it and keeps making great content, great films, great TV shows in that niche, and there's something to be said for that too.
Mm-hmm. And now that I know who Aaron Pierre is, I'm very excited because, like literally days before I saw this movie, it got announced that he is going to be playing Malcolm X in the next season of Genius, which is going to be called MLK/X, with Kelvin Harrison Jr. playing Martin Luther King Jr. and Jr. playing Jr. And Aaron Pierre playing Malcolm X. So that has me very excited for that, to sort of see how he will do, because he has a screen presence that is so utterly magnetic, because he is both charming and kind of terrifying at the same time. And I really think he's sort of the perfect person to play someone like Malcolm X, because those are shoes that are massive because of the shadow that Denzel Washington casts over anyone that will ever reprise the role of Malcolm X.
Yeah, I mean that's an amazing piece of casting right there. I'm just looking up. I hadn't heard that announcement, so that's actually super exciting.
Yeah, I've never seen any of the Genius miniseries, so I can't really comment on the quality of them. But I know they did one on Albert Einstein, one on Pablo Picasso. I think they did one on Aretha Franklin as well. So I think this is the first time they're sort of focusing on 2 people as the lead. So it's going to be interesting to see how they do with that.
Yeah, I haven't watched a ton of it either, but it is fairly well regarded, and they keep making more of it, so it can't be all bad. I'm very, knowing that he's going to be in it makes me want to check it out more, actually. Mm-hmm. So,
those are my 5 films.
Those are my 5 as well. So how was your experience overall at the festival? I mean, we both were fairly limited, but you've covered a number of festivals in the past. Where does VIFF sort of rank in your pantheon of the festivals you look forward to each year? Like, where does it rank for you?
I would say pretty highly now. The fact that it's one that I can do in person and not necessarily to pat myself on the back too much, but the fact that I get full access to the festival is a pretty big deal for me. I only started covering film festivals in the last like 2 to 3 years, really. And a lot of the time during the pandemic, it was a bit easier because different festivals would have full online programs, portals that you could watch, whether it was for public consumption or for critics. And now that COVID is loosening its restrictions and stuff like that, festivals are sort of turning their backs against the online portal aspect, which is frankly a little frustrating because it means you have to be physically in person or at worst within the same province or state that the festival is taking place in, which really limits what you can see and cover, especially since now I'm in British Columbia. Before being in Ontario, being able to see stuff at TIFF and Hot Docs and other Ontario-based festivals made it, or Cinefest Sudbury, made it a lot easier to cover them, whereas now it's much more difficult. And previously, TIFF I was not getting full access to this year. Interestingly enough, I did get a full access media pass for it, but I wasn't able to attend. So that pass went to waste because everything was geo-blocked for Ontario that they did have online access for, which was very frustrating to say the least. So yeah, VIFF would rank very highly for me because one, by virtue of the fact that I am able to see everything that I'm allowed to see is a plus, and the slate has been terrific, especially this year. I really loved the selection of movies that they had.
Yeah, I mean, for me, VIFF is my hometown festival, right? So it's pretty much my number one. I think it makes a great complement to the other festivals I enjoy covering, like say Montreal's Fantasia, which is very specifically genre focused, or something like Tribeca, which is very a little bit more art house focused. But yeah, I mean, you're right about the since the pandemic is, the funny thing about the pandemic being over is that everybody has COVID, but that's a whole other discussion. That's a different podcast. But yeah, definitely these years where they're starting to re-limit what they'll put out, even just for media people who are not local, is getting a little bit frustrating. But Vancouver, I think, does a really good job of being, a mid-sized festival. They have a lot of big titles. They have a lot of people who really care about the movies behind the scenes, and I think it really shows. So, yeah, I think that's it for my. Do you have any more VIFF coverage coming up in the coming week? I think this is going to be it for me. But do you have anything else coming up?
No, I think that's it for me as well. I don't think I'm going to be publishing any more reviews, and if I catch any of the screeners that I watch, I don't know if I have time. I'd love to write reviews for more, but I just don't know if I'll have time to either watch any more or write any more.
Yeah, I think I have a couple of screeners left. I think I'll probably get to watch, but I don't think there'll be any more coverage on the feed, unfortunately. But the next year, hopefully, circumstances will be different, and we can just go to everything. That'd be great.
That would be terrific, especially since we didn't actually meet up in person. I was able to hang out with Thomas Stoneham Judge one night where we watched Brother, then The Banshees of Inisherin back to back. And he was the only person I got to see. So I'm sad I missed the big group hang yesterday and getting to experience a screening with you in particular, Matthew. Yeah,
me too. I mean, we do live in the same city. We could make this happen. It's a real thing. So, although you live in North Van, which might as well be the moon. So, I'm blaming you. I'm blaming you for that.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, that about wraps up our show today. Matthew, thank you so much for joining me to talk about VIFF. Where can people find you and your show?
The easiest way to find me and my show is to search for Awesome Friday Podcast on your podcasting platform of choice. That'll be in the show notes, I assume, as well. You can find me on the Twitters at SmatthewAF, or you can find the show at awesomefriday.ca. And similarly named on Instagram and other places. But if you want to talk to us, Twitter's the place you should do that.
Yes, I do make quite prolific show notes where I stretch the character limit allowed on Anchor's backend for all the URLs that I include. And you're right, you'll be able to find links to the Awesome Friday podcast, the website, your personal accounts, your show's accounts, all that fun stuff in the show notes. But yes, and you can also read all the reviews I wrote at contrazoompod.com. You can follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at contrazoompod. If you have seen anything at the Vancouver International Film Festival, let us know your thoughts. Send an email to contrazoompod@gmail.com. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you like listening to this show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.